I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that the M2 is one of my dream attainable cars. I was so close to getting one earlier on last year, but after owning the 140 for nearly a year now, I'm pretty glad I didn't pull the trigger on it, which might sound a little bit backwards, saying that right after I said it was one of my dream cars, so let me explain. I was that blinded by the Long Beach blue paint, wide arches and the fact it said M2 on the back, I didn't pay any attention to the numbers, and I just presumed it'd be a better spec than any of the other cars below it in the BMW ranks, but that's not necessarily the case. So in this video, I'm going to run through some of the things that I've found out about the M2 over the past year, compare that to some other BMWs that are out there, and hopefully get to the bottom of whether or not the M2 is worth all of the extra cash you need to pay to get your hands on one, or if you're better off going for something else. Let's get into it. Now the M3 has always been a car that I wanted to own. Well, it was until the M2 came out just over 4 years ago now. Ever since then I've been transfixed on getting one for myself, but now I'm in an M140i and I'm absolutely loving it, to be fair. If money was no object, then yeah, I probably wouldn't even be making this video, as I'd be driving off into the sunset in an M2 competition. But like most mere mortals, money was a big deciding factor in what car I ended up choosing. Of course there are all of these fancy finance deals that you can sign up to, but even if you're really well off, spending £650 plus a month on a car that you're handing back in 4 years' time would still take some serious justification, or it would to me at least anyway. I'll circle back to the M2 comps a bit later on, but first I want to talk about the original M2 that was released midway through 2016. This is the car that I fell in love with. The Long Beach blue paint, the arse on it which was wider than Kim Kardashian's, and the front end styling was just so much more aggressive than any of the past generation M cars. On paper the stats are pretty impressive too. The 3-litre inline-6 N55 engine threw 365 brake horsepower to the rear wheels. And because of the short wheelbase paired with some chassis and suspension upgrades taken from the M4 no less, that meant it was an absolute demon in the twisties. I test drove one in March last year. Unfortunately I don't have any footage, but let me tell you they are so much more planted than the 140 and presumably the 240 as well. Here's my issue with it though. The two M-lite cars, the 140 and 240i, were released at the same time as the M2, but for whatever reason the M2 was given the inferior engine that BMW themselves said were in the process of phasing out. Yes, the revised N55 engine they pinched out of the M140i looks a bit better on paper because they've wedged in the pistons, crankshaft, valve timing and the oil pump in from the M3, but the B58 in the two other cars are widely regarded as one of the best engines BMW have developed in recent years. Obviously with an exception to the S55, but like I said I'll talk about that later on. Last month I took my car up to GM Imports to see what I was running standard, and the best result out of the 3 power runs was 355 brake horsepower, which puts it pretty much in line with an M2 when it comes to power output. So if all you care about is going fast in a straight line, then you might as well save yourself 10 grand and go with a 240, or if you've got kids, the 5-door 140 might be the better option for you. Seems like a no-brainer. But really, that's not what you're paying for in an M2. The steering rack and subframes, both front and rear, are lifted directly from the M4, which is a significant improvement over the non-M cars. When you pair that rigid body-mounted rear subframe with no suspension bushes, yes you get a firmer ride, but it makes the world of difference when you're attacking the bends. And that is what you're paying the extra money for. You also get an electric LSD, which is another drastic improvement over the open differential fitted standard to the M-lites. But for everyday driving, you can't really tell the difference in having an LSD over an open diff, unless you absolutely hammer it over the B-roads all the time. Which, to be fair, I do. But even though my car's now stage 1, it's still really manageable without one. It all depends on how you drive it, but basically what I'm saying is unless you're taking the OG M2 to the track or driving it over undulating roads every day, there isn't much point in going for one. Apart from having the all-important bragging rights of saying that you own a true M car, because on normal roads the 140s and 240s will pretty much match it for straight line speed, and they're a little bit comfier if you're an old man like me and you care about that now. If you're in an M2 and you come across an M-lite that's had a couple of grand spent on it for a few braces, a diff and a tune, which seem to be the must-have modifications for these cars now, you might find yourself being gapped, which would be pretty embarrassing to be honest. But I'll keep it fair and just compare the standard cars because not everyone's into bolting bits on like me. Anyway, after the M140i and M2 had been out for a couple of years, the engineers back at BMW must have realised their mistakes and decided to launch the revised version of each car. The M-lites were simply too close in performance to the original M2, and I have a feeling that's why the M2 competition was born. They could have gave the car a beefed up variant of the B58, but nah, they managed to shoehorn the S55 out of an M3 into it, and it was exactly what everyone hoped it'd be. Fucking class. My guess is they called the new 140 the Shadow Edition, not because it comes with some privacy glass and some black trim, but because they damn well knew it was in the shadow of the M2 comp. Yep, it's even more money than the OG M2, but it's just simply more car. The thing is now though, the M2 has another problem. Rather than it being M-lites chewing at its heels, they're now in the same price range as M3s and M4s. To the average petrol head, that isn't that much of a big deal. We all know that they're on par with the performance of its two bigger brothers, but I can guarantee you're going to get people who really don't know what they're talking about, just assuming that it's nowhere near the same level, because, well, 2 + 2 = 4, so that must mean it's only half as good as an M4, ha ha ha. You see what I mean, don't you? But it holds its own, and what it lacks in size, it more than makes up for in other areas. I could talk all day about these cars, I absolutely adore them, and I've purposely not mentioned the CS because it makes me sad that I'll probably never be able to afford one of those things. But hopefully I'll get one onto the channel sometime because they are the creme de la creme when it comes to performance cars at the moment. Right, after all that then, I best summarise it all up. I personally think I did the right thing in going for the 140 over the OG M2, even if it wasn't my original plan. I saved myself 10 grand, and if I wanted the car to handle a bit more like an M2, I could always dip into the money that I saved, invest in a differential, underbody brace, control arms, etc, etc, and still have about 7 grand left to play with, but it's good enough for the time being. On the other hand, I can see why people would still go for it over the M-lites. It looks nicer, sounds so much better, and like I said before, you have the all-important bragging rights of owning a fully fledged M car. So you can look down on M-lite peasants like me and just spit on them. With all that being said, if a miracle ever happens and I hit big time on YouTube somehow, or more likely win the lottery, the M2 competition would be the ultimate choice. If you're in a position to get yourself one, just do it. I think it's the greatest car that BMW have ever made, to be honest, and that's a pretty bold claim. I know I'm going to get all the fanboys saying, oh well, what about the E46 M3, Luke, or the Z3M, but it's just my opinion, man, chill out. To summarise that fairly long summary then, is the M2 worth the extra money over an M-lite? I don't think it is for an original with the M55 under the bonnet, but without a doubt it's worth blowing your life savings on the competition model, so yes and no. I'd love to know what you guys think. It seems to be a pretty hot topic over on the forums, so I just thought I'd stick my 2p in for the sake of a few views. Maybe all of this was just a ploy for the OG owners to start selling the cars, so I could pick one up for cheap, who knows. Any road, that's enough from me. I hope you enjoyed the video. Drop it a like or a comment if you did, and you can always subscribe to the channel to see more stuff like this in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!